Hi, my name is Jaden, and for my GEOG 262 urban planning final project, we're focusing on a sustainability evaluation of a city's comprehensive plan. And for my project, I have chosen to focus on housing within the city of New Bedford, Massachusetts. New Bedford is the ninth largest city in Massachusetts. It's about 100,000 people as of 2024. This rate has varied over time, but has generally increased over the last couple of decades. The city does have a very high poverty rate, especially compared to the local areas, sitting around 20%. There's also very low median household income, which is again about half of the mass average. So it is on the very far ends of the spectrum in both of these categories. And then if we consider housing, there's very low vacancy rates, and there are also majority renters concerning the households, which is not ideal for the longevity of the town. General overplan of the comprehensive plan here. The general goals are to modernize land use and support new housing developments and renewal projects. Their strategy plans focus on facilitating new housing as well as using existing housing space and housing stock in things like mills and otherwise empty spaces that could be utilized for housing. However, they are focusing on all income levels for this new housing, opposed to focusing on maybe just low income or focusing for just people who live in the most impoverished areas in the city or in the most impoverished housing categories. Some implementation tools for their project. The primary one is tax credit funding programs, which a particular case of this is the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Tax Credit Program. This has allocated around $50 million in state tax credits, supporting things like mill conversions, but also community centers and theaters and other general community projects. Indicators for this, as outlined in their comprehensive plan, are the number of households and the housing stock. Between 2010 and 2020, the number of households in New Bedford grew by around 8%, and the housing stock increased by around 4%. Ideally, this would be higher, but any increase is great, especially considering the longevity of the city. To tie this into the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I've chosen SDG 10 and 11. SDG 10 is reducing inequalities, and 11 is fostering sustainable cities and communities. Access to housing in New Bedford is really an income inequality problem, so focusing on inequalities is going to be a great way to tackle this. And then there's obviously the vacancy issue, which can be tackled in other ways. Considering the sustainable cities, development of housing has simply failed to keep up with the development of the city and the population increases, as well as the demand for people wanting to live in the city, as it is a relatively nice place to live. And also the fact that it is majority renters is relatively unsustainable for the longevity of the city, as you'd like to see homeowners able to establish families and develop ties to the city beyond renting, and to eventually be priced out and forced to move to nearby cities and towns, which they outline in their comprehensive plan. Moving on to the internal SWOT analysis. Some of the equity strengths would be considering the general increase in housing, and also the fact that they're targeting a wide range of potential housing. This is realistically both a strength and a weakness. If we go down to the equity weaknesses, it's the fact that they don't prioritize low-income housing needs is also a bit of an issue, considering they're the most directly affected. And also the fact that they're focusing on community spaces instead of simply housing maybe takes away from their ultimate goals of trying to tackle housing as a specific issue, opposed to the general longevity of the city. Looking at the climate strengths, it does capitalize on using abandoned space like mills, which is a good sustainability tactic to eliminate some of the climate cost of developing new housing. And focusing on things like tenement housing and increasing the population density is great for saving space and increasing the longevity of the town's growth, or excuse me, the city's growth. Some climate weaknesses to consider is that any increased development outside of renewal projects like mills is going to have a significant climate cost, as all development does. So focusing on high density is pretty important in that kind of category. Considering the external factors for this analysis, the equity opportunities, there's certainly potential for new sources of funding, which would be very beneficial in actually getting some of these programs off the ground and actually increasing housing and establishing more kind of tenement style mills and things like that, where there's a high density and also a low climate cost. And then also fostering some kind of community involvement in this planning. It would be a great benefit to make people feel really involved in the city and want to settle down and create ties there long term. Moving to some of these equity threats, involving corporate housing through tax breaks and things like that is not necessarily the best plan for the residents of the city, as historically this is typically tied to rent increases and gentrification. However, it is something that is ultimately kind of inevitable unless we do more subsidized, particularly state or city funded and operated housing. And then looking at things like the increase of housing, but no rent control or anything like that to actually control the price, will likely price out a lot of the existing residents and invite higher income people into the city, pricing out the people who are already living there. Moving to some climate opportunities, developing sustainable housing, it would be a very good benefit of this, considering a lot of the housing in the city is very old. Moving towards something that's newer and more sustainable would be a general benefit. However, there is a historical element to a lot of the housing here that simply can't be tampered with for a number of reasons. And then some of these climate pressures, obviously, inviting overdevelopment could really be a big development or climate issue, especially as the city is already kind of reaching its ultimate kind of carrying weight for the population. And then some recommendations I would have for the improvement of this plan. Something along the lines of rent control would really allow to stabilize some affordable housing, decreasing some of that income inequality issues. And then particular protections for marginalized groups would be ideal. Some kind of stronger tenant protection. And the enforcement of that would be very beneficial to attacking the justice side of these issues. And then things like NIMBYism and people not wanting the increase of development or high-rise, low-income rented space is generally a disservice to the people who are already living in that area, and they ultimately deserve to have access to affordable housing. So ideally, some kind of anti-NIMBY legislation where lobby groups and the privileged areas can't necessarily block the progress of low-income housing to tackle these issues within New Bedford particularly. To implement this, legislation and lobbying for it is ultimately one of the most strong plans, given the very politicized nature of housing in the current political standing of America. And then focusing on things like grassroots initiatives and local policy legislation would ideally be the biggest or the quickest and easiest way forward for guaranteeing some relieving of these issues. This is proven useful in other places, where there are more strict laws against it. So ideally, somewhere like Massachusetts would be a little easier to succeed in that. And as a way to measure this, you could do it through a percentage of minority evictees, measuring the development of low-income housing in prosperous areas, and facilitation of statewide rent control or stabilization. Also, you could do things like increasing of rent vouchers locally through policy making. And then here are my references. Thank you.